So this week, President Trump gave an address to the United Nations General Assembly that
Trump was right about everything. And I don't say that in a braggadocious way, but it's true. I've been right about everything.
And in the 1 hour of his 15-minute speech, he touched on several topics, including climate change. And this went about as well as you might expect.
If you don't get away from this green scam, your country is going to fail. And I'm really good at predicting things, you know?
But here's the thing. Did Trump actually speak truth to power here? Like, did he get something turbo right? Well, let's find out by having a look at the Trump Truthometer. I'm going to be placing several statements from his speech on here, starting with China doesn't use wind turbines.
They build them, but they very few wind farms. But they sure as hell like selling the windmills.
Donald, they're wind turbines, not windmills. And this one is going right here at the bottom. China generates more wind energy than any country on Earth. It's not even close. The number 2 generator, incidentally, is the United States. And China generates about the same fraction of all its electricity from wind as the United States does. They both generate about 10%. Next up, renewables are the most expensive form of energy.
They're a joke. They don't work. They're too expensive. Most expensive energy ever conceived.
Yep, that's gonna go down here. 20 years ago, might have been up here, but no, this is firmly in this territory. The data indicates that he's just completely wrong here. Like, Lazard is the most widely cited figure here for the levelized cost of electricity. It is widely known that renewables are either competitive or just the cheapest option in most regions and markets. And incidentally, are getting cheaper and cheaper. It's what's called the learning curve. So, you know, solar and wind are much cheaper now than they were 20 years ago, while fossil fuels are basically the same cost. And nuclear, interestingly, has actually got more expensive than it was 20 years ago. Next up, going green means going bankrupt.
All green is all bankrupt. That's what it represents.
No, that's down here. So there's the barest grain of truth to this one. Going green, or in other words, getting to net zero, is expensive. There's no doubt about it. You're talking trillions of dollars being invested in bringing down carbon emissions. But the alternative of not doing that and just kind of carrying on as we currently are and heating the planet more and more will cost more money. Like, one estimate has it at $1.2 quadrillion more. So that's 1,200 trillion more. And that's because climate change intensifies natural disasters. It means that we will have more economic damage from things like heat waves, hurricanes, droughts, you name it. So going green, or getting to net zero, is the cheaper option, but that doesn't mean that it's cheap. Let's talk numbers. Heat-related deaths.
So while the U.S. has approximately 1,300 heat-related deaths annually, that's a lot, Europe loses more than 175,000 people to heat deaths each year because the costs are so expensive you can't turn on an air conditioner.
Now this one I don't think deserves to be right at the bottom. I'm going to put it slightly higher, but only slightly. No, that's too generous. No. So this one's kind of interesting, and I actually looked up the latest figures for this. Europe in 2023 saw 47,000 heat-related deaths, while the USA saw just 2,300. So Trump is wrong on both figures, but there is still an interesting disconnect there between the European and American figures. If you control for population, because the USA does have approximately half the population of Europe, like 740 million in Europe, 340 million-ish in the United States, that's still a big difference. Hopefully, needless to say, the difference is not solely caused by people not wanting to turn the AC on. Like, there's so many factors going on here that, that's a massive oversimplification. And I would also like to note that those heatwave deaths in America have increased by 117% over the past 24 years. Because, well, I don't know, it's almost like it's getting hotter.
You know, it's interesting.
Clean, beautiful coal.
Clean, beautiful coal.
How low can the camera see? Coal is the most polluting form of energy, whether you're measuring by carbon emissions or by human fatalities, especially caused by the particulate matter created when burning coal. There's nothing clean or beautiful about it. This one's straight out of the YouTube comment section. Whatever happened to global cooling?
You know, it used to be global cooling. If you look back years ago in the 1920s and the 1930s, they said, global cooling will kill the world.
Looking at those exact words that he said, I'm going to put this about about here. So I actually made a whole video about this previously, about the whatever happened to global cooling argument. To briefly summarize, yes, in the 1970s in particular, there were quite a few scientists who published talking about global cooling and worried that the planet was cooling. But at no point did those scientists constitute the majority. In any given year, most papers still pointed to global warming. That was always the consensus opinion. As for the move from global warming to climate change, that is an interesting topic in itself. I've also made a video about that. And you could argue that it was a bad thing because it is less direct, it's less scary language, but at the same time, it is also more accurate. It does encapsulate things besides just temperature increases. It also talks about the redistribution of energy, the changes of precipitation patterns, that kind of thing. That's why we started talking about climate change, not because we just wanted to cover our bases.
We have very clean air. We have the cleanest air we've had in many, many years.
America has clean air. This one might surprise you, but this one is gonna go, yeah, I'd say about there. America's air is a lot cleaner than it used to be. It has, compared to lots of other parts of the world, pretty clean air. And you know how that happened? It's because of government legislation passed especially at the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, that tightened up rules on polluters and it brought down the level of pollution, especially sulfate pollution. And that's also legislation that Trump has now rescinded and got rid of, and is going to make America's air quality worse. I don't know what else I could say.
In Asia, they dump much of their garbage right into the ocean, and over about a 1 week and 2 week journey, it flows right past Los Angeles. You've seen it.
This one sent me 2 weeks to cross the Pacific. If you actually look at the numbers, water traveling in a straight line across the Pacific, which it doesn't do, would need to travel at 30 kilometers per hour to get from one side to the other in 2 weeks. And water doesn't travel that fast. It's a fraction of that. The barest amount of Googling shows you that water typically crosses the Pacific in like 4 to 5 years. I don't know why this one tilted me so much. It's so ridiculous. What were you thinking? Almost done. America disproportionately paid under the Paris Agreement.
That's why in America I withdrew from the fake Paris Climate Accord, where, by the way, America was paying so much more than every country.
I love how he says the fake Paris Climate Accord. Like, I don't, which part of it was fake? Okay, this is another one where there's like the barest grain of truth, but not much. I'm gonna put this about here. So fun fact, nowhere in the Paris Agreement does it say that a given country has to contribute a given amount of money. There is an obligation for rich countries to help developing countries to finance their green transition, but there's no part of the text that requires an individual country to do, well, anything. The Paris Agreement is built on this idea called common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities. In other words, everybody has a responsibility to fix this problem, but certain people have contributed to it more, and certain people are more able to help others fix the problem. America has contributed a huge amount to the problem and has the ability to help others. And so that's why America has voluntarily contributed to the Paris Agreement. It was never obligated to do so, and it was the right, responsible thing to do so. But we've got one more claim. Trump's belief that climate change is the greatest con ever pulled.
Higher or lower, whatever the hell happens, this climate change, it's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, in my opinion.
And all the way up at the top, you can absolutely argue that climate change is the biggest con ever pulled, but by the fossil fuel industry.
The carbon footprint is a hoax made up by people with evil intentions, and they're heading down a path of total destruction. You know, the carbon footprint was a big, big thing.
Fossil fuels have allowed for an incredible spate of human development. Like, human lives have been materially improved by the availability of energy. But at the same time, our environment has been massively undermined, and the future of, well, civilization as we know it is under threat because of those fuels. Yet, the industry that sells those fuels has convinced scores of people that there is no problem, and if there was a problem, that they weren't responsible, despite clear and overwhelming evidence that that is the case. There is extensive evidence that from the 1960s onwards, the fossil fuel industry knew that they were creating a huge problem, that they were fundamentally changing the world's climate, and that emissions were going to rise, and environmental damage was also going to rise. And yet, they engaged in decades of undermining public trust in climate scientists, they engaged in misinformation campaigns, and more recently have attempted to shift responsibility away from themselves and towards individuals through the carbon footprint. This was an idea that was popularized by BP in the early 2000s, trying to make individuals think that they were somehow responsible for climate change and thus were responsible for fixing it. You know, instead of the industry selling the fuels, fueling the problem. The extent that the fossil fuel industry knew they were creating this problem and still engaged in deception and undermining of public trust in climate science has been extensively documented, most recently in the decades of denial from the Union of Concerned Scientists. I would highly recommend reading it. So, like a stop clock being right twice a day, or actually maybe a bit more like a sundial in a shady country.
I was going to say, a sundial neatly planted in the shade.
Isn't it good? Yes.
Yeah.
Did President Trump actually nail this one? Is President Trump turbo-based? Yeah, no. The thing to remember about President Trump is that when you hear him talk about a particular subject, you're not really hearing him. He doesn't have a consistent ideology about really anything. What you're hearing is the last person who spoke to him about that subject. And in the case of climate change, what you hear here is just a bunch of talking points from the fossil fuel industry and right-wing groups who are opposed to just government legislation, full stop. In fact, at one point, I'm pretty sure he just repeats verbatim what one of his handlers said to him, presumably just like an hour before.
Never use the word coal, only use the words clean, beautiful coal. Sounds much better, doesn't it?
And at another point, he just reads off a demand from the fossil fuel industry. Like, tell me with a straight face that this man came up with this sentence on his own.
The entire globalist concept of asking successful industrialized nations to inflict pain on themselves and radically disrupt their entire societies must be rejected completely and totally, and it must be immediate.
By sheer coincidence, Trump gave this speech the day before we released an hour-long video talking about the link between climate misinformation, the fossil fuel industry, and the Trump administration. If you haven't seen that yet, please do check it out. Because clearly, as long as Trump is in office, the fossil fuel industry has a willing spokesperson. Willing to say the most incorrect stuff on the biggest stage imaginable. And it's partly in response to this that you may have noticed, I've been putting out a lot more vertical video, here on YouTube but also on TikTok and Instagram. I've been putting out several pieces of short form content every week with a focus on misinformation. And this has been possible because I've taken on a full-time short form producer. He's called Tristan, who's been working for me for the past month now. We sat down and had a chat here in the studio about what we're trying to accomplish with these videos, Tristan's background, our workflow, and what success will hopefully look like in 6 months' time. And you can watch that chat right now if you have a Nebula subscription. If you don't know, Nebula is the streaming service that I, along with over 100 other creators, co-own and upload exclusive content to. You can watch behind the scenes of some big videos, interviews with experts, and whole extra video essays. And that's just the stuff from me. Nebula is full of exclusive content, including original programming, like Abolish Everything. That original content is funded by subscription revenue, which is divided between creators based on the watch time that their videos generate, with some set aside for operational costs and financing cool original projects. And best of all, because we run on a subscription model rather than an advertising model, when you're watching Nebula, you don't see ads. It's like YouTube, but better. And you know that by watching a creator, you're directly supporting them. If you already have a Nebula subscription, then you can watch my chat with Tristan right now. If you don't have one yet, you can get one at go.nebula.tv/Simon Clark. And I should point out that if you go there, you will get 40% off, including on lifetime membership. That discount will save you $200. That link again, go.nebula.tv/Simon Clark. Please do check out that chat with Tristan. It's available right now on my Nebula channel, and I've got a good feeling about this. I'm hoping that we can do another chat in 6 months' time and talk about the impact that we've had. This was not the video I was planning on making this week. You're going to watch that one in a couple of weeks' time. So thanks, Trump. And thank you to the wonderful people who support me over on patreon.com/SimonOxFizz. If you support me on Patreon, not only do you keep these videos coming, as a thank you, you also get early access to videos, exclusive content every month, and at higher tiers can choose topics for me to cover. Thank you so much to all my patrons, with a special thank you to Mama Lama Ding Dong, Jack King, and Felix Blucher. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Thank you so much for your support. If you'd like to watch something else from me next, then here's 2 videos I prepared earlier. I'd recommend this one. That's the one I mentioned earlier, and I'm really quite proud of it. Thank you again for watching this one, and I'll see you in the next one.